Hello and welcome. I'm Fahd Husain. Today, the story has taken a twist. We were all expecting talks between Iran and the United States to start in Islamabad shortly. It was announced that the American delegation would be coming to Islamabad Monday evening and start negotiations with the Iranians probably on Tuesday. But then something happened which has now cast a shadow over this process. The American Navy intercepted an Iranian ship, took it over, and as a result of which Iran this morning announced that they would not speak with the US because they do not trust the US at all. Of course, this comes in the wake of US President Donald Trump issuing some very inflammatory and aggressive statements against Iran on the eve of talks, which caught many by surprise. So the bigger question today is, where do things go from here? Pakistan, of course, as the host of these talks, is doing everything in its power to try and convince the two sides to resume talks so that we can find some off-ramp and get an end to the conflict. What should the Americans do? What should the Iranians do? What can happen? Can the talks start again? These are the big questions that we are going to discuss in our first segment. And to talk about all of these, I'm joined by Mr. Mohammad Amirsi. He is a member of the Global Advisory Council of the Wilson Center and keeps a very close eye on Iran and this region. Mr. Amirsi, thank you for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here and following such august speakers that you have previously invited. So thank you.
Right. So now you know what the situation is. What do you see happening, Mr. Amirsi? Do you think that this whole process, which has been so painstakingly built for the last couple of weeks, is now fracturing or is in the danger of being broken? Or are these moves by both sides just prior to negotiations?
Let me make 2 or 3 points. I come from the world of business, and what you are seeing play out here is exactly the same that you would find in any difficult negotiations, especially one where the counterparties have had a hostile attitude towards each other for the best part of 40 plus years. So this is not a surprise. I think that the expectations were very high first time round. I saw many comments that said after 22 hours or 21 hours of discussions, why was a deal not done? And I tweeted and said it's naive to expect that people that have been fighting for 40 years are going to find resolution on everything in 21 years. To me, the Pakistani effort was amazing. The work done by your General Asim Munir and your Prime Minister has been phenomenal. Previously, as you know, everybody has tried. The Omanis tried, the Turks tried, the Europeans tried, and all largely failed. And this is historic because it's the first time that you had the Vice President of the United States meeting his counterpart from Iran face to face without any handholders or chaperones. So I really applaud Pakistan for achieving this. What happened in the first round was very important because it laid some very important framework for now what happens today. And what happens today or tomorrow or next week is largely now what one might expect negotiating posturing, i.e. people test each other to see who has the better leverage, who needs the talks, who needs the resolution more than the other. And in all of this, it's not uncommon from time to time for parties to up the ante, as we say. And we have to be very, very careful to separate questions of form from questions of substance. And if these are mature negotiators, which I believe that on the Iranian side they should learn how to set aside questions of form and focus on substance. Now, the only awkward substance here is the one you pointed out, which is the U.S. onboarding a Iranian vessel and taking control control of it, or rather Trump said we blasted a hole in it. I don't really know all the details. And this could be seen by some people in Iran as an act of bad faith rather than just pure negotiating posture. On the other hand, Iran, were told that the Iranian ships in the vicinity would be subjected to the blockade. The blockade is an issue that was supposed to be resolved after dialogue. So there is, I would say, blame to some degree on both sides. Now, I am hoping if the agenda in the US is that this is nothing more than a cosmetic, optical discussion, and that they want to be able to tick a box and tell the MAGA people that we went the extra mile to get something done, then what you are seeing is nothing more than optics and cosmetics, and nothing will be done. Supporting that is the massive naval and air force buildup in the Gulf that continues. So Iran, having had so many failed attempts, I was involved in the one that took place earlier this year in talking to both parties, one directly, one indirectly. Last year I was involved. I was in in Rome, when the Italians negotiated or put together a forum. I was in Oman as well. And you can see there is significant mistrust by the Iranians of the United States. So this is where we are.
Okay,
I'm hoping that if the will is there, there will be a deal to be done.
Now, the issue is, Mr. Mercy, of course, based on your experience, as you said, that you've also been involved in so many of these negotiations. The problem that I'm seeing is the shortage of time, because the situation that we have now is that the American president has doubled down on the naval blockade. He said twice that he will keep the naval blockade till the time that an actual deal is done. As a result of which the Iranian side has today said categorically that as long as the naval blockade is there, they're not interested in talking. Now, these are two positions which are quite far from each other. And the deadline for the ceasefire is about to end. It's little more than 24 hours, maybe 36 hours to go. So what I'm trying to figure out is, even if this is posturing, as you're saying, somebody has to blink, something has to happen before the ceasefire deadline runs out. So how do you see this clock deciding the next course of action?
So look, for me, it's very, very simple. There is a very easy compromise to be built here. Very easy, okay? I think that the Iranian demand for the blockade to be lifted before they sit on the table, I think they need to rethink that. And if they are listening to this podcast, which I hope they will be, they are, then they should take that very seriously. It is not that important for the blockade to be lifted now. They should come to Pakistan. They should have a meeting with the US side. And I'm told reliably that the parties were working towards a 5-page memorandum of understanding. And while this MOU is being prepared, if the US feel they want to show power by having a blockade for another 24 or 48 hours beyond the expiration of the ceasefire, what's going to change? Nothing. So do the MOU, and then in the MOU, there will be a pathway to getting the final deal done. Once the MOU is signed, there is no basis for the Americans to impose any blockade while the final negotiations are happening, which could take up to 2 months because there are too many detailed points that need to be resolved. That's the compromise, where you allow for this to continue until parties sit at the table and get an MOU done. Okay, it's another 3 days away. And the Pakistanis are very skilled at this. I'm sure that the MOU drafts that have been already prepared, there will not be too much talk needed because it's only an MOU, okay?
I would agree with you, because I think that is the best course of action, Mr. Mercy. I think we need both sides to be here, and I think the hard work put in by Pakistani leadership to try and bring both sides closer to each other was and most likely is paying dividends. As you also know that Field Marshal Asim Munir was in Tehran for a number of days, And the fact that the US president decided to send his senior negotiators to Pakistan, led by the vice president, means that the American president was communicated the message that the Iranians are willing to meet him halfway, roughly speaking. So clearly there was enough progress for him to send people to Islamabad. Now, of course, Iranians, as you are saying, it is in their interest also, because this is an opportunity which should not be missed. And so much work has actually gone into it. Do you think that if things don't change as of today, Iranians can be convinced to come to Islamabad, maybe tomorrow, maybe soon? What will convince them?
Okay, so there are a couple of points here. The travel of Witkoff and Kushner was confirmed. The travel of J.D. Vance was not confirmed. And so that needs to be confirmed, because if it is only Kushner and Witkoff, and if I'm in the Iranian side, I would say that this is not serious. We've been with these two people before, and largely that it has failed, because look, neither of these people are members of the administration. If they were the Secretary of State for Marco Rubio or Secretary of Defense, then at least you know that they are members of the administration. Here, one is a son-in-law and one is a best friend, golf buddy. So there is a bit of skepticism in Iran as to whether finally these two people are able to deliver a deal. If the vice president was coming, then my advice to Iran will be, please come. The problem with the Iranians is, and I know them reasonably well for the years, all of them for the last 10 years, even those that negotiated the JPOA, they do not know when to stop negotiating. And I have told them that they need to take their win and build on it, build trust, because a lot of things can change. This is a process. You cannot expect a 500-page deal to be signed after 40 years of hostility. It will not happen. There is need to be trust building. So take the win now. So far, things have worked out for you, and build on it.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Amarsi. You're actually the second senior person who's actually saying the same point here on this show, that Iranians are tough negotiators, but sometimes they don't know when to clinch the deal. The moment passes. But also feeding into that.
And let me make one more point.
Sure.
And there is a disconnect, okay? So you have an Iranian delegation that is extremely experienced, years of experience in diplomacy, in the Foreign Office, Foreign Services. They're all distinguished diplomats. I know all of them, or most of them that are there. On the other side, you do not have diplomats. You have two business people. On the Iranian negotiating team, there is no business person who understands the psychology of the US people. And so they are talking largely at cross purposes sometimes. And so I think that Iranians have to be staffed with people who are deal makers, who understand the psychology and mindset of their counterparts. And on the American side, you need a little bit more substance on the diplomatic side. Then at least you've got people speaking the same language.
Which is an interesting point, but perhaps given the shortage of time, I don't think the Americans are going to change their team. But the fact is, I think the point that you're making, this was also evident in Geneva, where I think the Iranians gave the Americans a good deal, and I think they missed it. Now there's a second chance coming. How much of a problem is this internal disagreement within the Iranian power structure? Because, the reason I'm asking is because only a few days ago, the Iranian foreign minister announced that the Strait of Hormuz was open. And then he got criticized by people from within. And then ultimately that order was overturned. So this problem of internal disagreement, how serious is that?
So there are two schools of thought, okay? One school of thought, which I subscribe to, talk about that it is always in a negotiating team, people play the good cop, bad cop game to see if they can extract any further mileage. That's the subscription, that's what I subscribe to. There is another view which mainstream media parades to say that this is a fracture in Iranian leadership, It's really the people with the guns and the boats that are in charge, and people that smile with a suit have no real power. I don't think that is the case. I think that they are very aligned, especially now after all the people that have been assassinated, from the supreme leader down to Larijani to Kharazi. These are senior people. And if that does not bring the Iranians together, I'm not sure what will bring them together. So I think that they are speaking with one voice, but they are trying to flex and see if anything better can come out of this.
And you are confident, given your internal and close knowledge and understanding of how the Iranian decision-making apparatus moves, you are confident that they will ultimately come to Islamabad and sit down across the table with the Americans and start talking.
Okay, so the choice is, if they did not do that, then what's the option? The option is that the United States and Israel will continue destroying a large part of Iranian infrastructure. Whether they will go to power stations or water plants, I don't know, because the whole definition of going to the infrastructure may constitute war crimes. I'm not a legal expert, but there are views on either side. But naturally, there will be massive, massive destruction and loss of life and misery for these people who are already suffering huge hardship because of the sanctions. So if prevail, then let's get a deal done. Okay. Now, the important thing to note here, which is missed by most people, is that President Trump's time in office is another 2 years and 9 months, or whatever the 8 months. Okay. So after he leaves, then you have another administration that is in charge. So just as President Trump said, he doesn't want to be bound by the actions of Presidents Obama and Biden. He says they did lousy deals. Then naturally the same should apply to him. So why does he bind Iranians to 20 years when he himself is only there for another 2.5? And his successors may or may not agree, based on the state of the world at that time, or whether this was a good deal or a bad deal. So if I were the Iranians, I would say we are happy to stop our enrichment as long as you remain president. And that's a big win for you, because you can say that during the term of your presidency, Iran did not enrich uranium and proceed to building a bomb.
So, that is one of the arguments that they may have put forward. But hopefully, as you're also saying, that they do come to Islamabad and talks do start, and there is some sort of a framework which has been negotiated to a large extent, and that is actually agreed upon and signed. You feel that that agreement would enable both Iran and the US to spin their own narratives and convince their own people that they've got a good deal?
I think that, look, it's in the United States, the MAGA movement largely, and large parts of the United States have put their trust and faith in President Trump. If he says that I am the president that stopped Iran from developing a bomb, I am the president that stopped Iran from enriching uranium, I am the president that put some brakes on Iran's ability to use their missiles to attack Israel. Hey, look, I am the hero. People will generally not question that as much. In Iran, there will be far more questions to say that after all the death and destruction, why are we still playing second fiddle to them after what they've done? They've shown no remorse, and they continue to bind us more and more. So I think the question in Iran will be, okay, let's do the deal, but then who is going to pay for all the damage and destruction that has been caused in Iran? This to them is as big a question as getting a deal done. And then into that is the question, will sanctions be lifted? So if the US decide to lift sanctions, allow Iran to sell oil in the open market at open market prices, then the question of compensation, which is still valid, becomes a little bit more nuanced. Okay? And if not, then they should be permitted to say, charge a fee, share it with Oman, because both of you control the straits, and charge a fee and use the money from that fee to pay for your rebuild and reconstruction, because we ain't going to compensate you.
I think that will probably be one of the key demands that the Iranians will put forward. Mr. Mersi, finally,
Sure.
we've also in Pakistan, we've invested so much into our
Of course.
mediation. It's been many weeks, and as you very correctly said that we've done far more than I think most people imagined that we could, and we are now the sole mediators, and I think probably the only country that is trusted equally by the Americans, by the Iranians, by the Saudis, by the Chinese. It's a unique position that we've had, and we are actually
Absolutely.
genuinely trying our best to make it happen.
So I
How do
think
you look at Pakistan's role now and in the days and months forward whenever this conflict comes to an end, which it will inshallah come to an end? How do you see this
so.
episode continuing
My
in terms of
advice,
Pakistan's role?
yeah, my advice to Pakistan today would be um, two things. One is try and get a further extension to the ceasefire. Not that it's strictly needed, and if there is no trust, yes, it's needed. If there is trust between the parties, it will make no difference. Okay, so try and get a 3 to 7 day extension to the ceasefire to calm things down. Number one, that should be an easy one from both sides, unless there is bad faith on one side or the other. The second thing I would do after that is to try to see what are the 7 key points that should be worked out in the MOU. And even in the MOU, if the MOU is nothing more than an agenda setting MOU, a framework for the 60 days or 90 days they'll have to spend discussing detail, at least they've got on a table. Now, you remember that when the discussion started, the Iranians came with 10 points and the Americans, or the Iranians 10 points or 15 points, one side, the other side had some other points, okay? So they should take on this and say, at least the MOU, the common ground between the two sides are these 10 points, okay? And agree that this is the framework for the 60-day dialogue. If they can get those two things done, an extension and an agenda agreed for the 60 days of discussions, I think that's a huge win for Pakistan and the world.
And we all hope that actually that is exactly what happens. We are praying and hoping and praying that sanity prevails,
Sure.
and peace can break out right here from Islamabad. Mr. Mohammad Amarsi, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us today from London.
It's a pleasure.
We will take a short break, but when we come back, what is happening with the shipping traffic in the Straits of Hormuz after this severe disruption, its impact, and in months ahead, major changes that can happen. We will be joined by an expert to stay with us. Today I want to speak about alternate routes, and the reason why I want to speak about that is because the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is now having an impact far beyond what people could have imagined. So now let's look at the map. This is the main traffic which goes across all over the world from Strait of Hormuz. But more importantly, if you look at this map shows you the alternate routes. For example, Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest suppliers of oil, used to take this route for its oil export because this is blocked right here, Strait of Hormuz. So they have a pipeline overland which is called the East-West pipeline. It carries 7 million barrels per day, clearly nowhere near what they used to send from this route. This oil is offloaded here at the Yambu port. Tankers most likely come from here, Red Sea, take the oil and then move through the Suez Canal onwards. Abu Dhabi has a pipeline, but clearly it doesn't have enough capacity. Bab al-Mandab, right here, the mouth of the Red Sea, 2.47 million barrels per day, which has seen an increase of 330%. So this is essentially the route that we are looking at, but there's the severe capacity issues right here. Moving on. Now, this shows you exactly where the problem is being created, because if you look at shipping, this is the Strait of Hormuz, this right here is the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandab, and because this is the shortest route for shipping, all the ships that come from here, from Asia, they would come here, pass through here and through the the Suez Canal and onwards. But now, because of the uncertainty here, they have to take this long route via the Cape of Good Hope. 9.1 million barrels per day have passed here. The problem with this route, of course, is not just that it is much more expensive. The freight charges go higher up, but the time that it takes, the extra time, about 2 weeks or so of travel time, so that becomes very problematic. And of course, this is some more data. This chart actually shows you how the traffic is being disrupted. The Suez Canal traffic, if you see, gone from 49 to 23 ships. The Bab al-Mandab route, which is this one, the green one, you can see here, it begins to get all haphazard. This is a time where there's a lot of disruption and uncertainty because of the Houthis there, and all of this is disruption. This is the Cape route, as you can see, very low, again, because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, freight and especially the time that it takes. But then, when disruptions happen in other routes, this begins to go up. And suddenly you can see now in 2025 and now 26, this is peaking. This essentially means that there is a lot of disruption happening everywhere. The bottom line is that there are alternate routes available, they are being used, but they cannot carry the kind of supply that is required by the world economies, which essentially means that even though these routes provide some relief, without the Strait of Hormuz, the supply of oil and shipping will remain disrupted. So we've been discussing the latest situation as we talked about earlier, there is this element of uncertainty about when the talks will take place in Islamabad and whether they will actually happen or not. Of course, conventional wisdom says that it is in the interest of both the US and Iran that they do come to Islamabad, sit across the table and try and find a way out of this conflict. But while this is happening, the worst affected area or the core of the area, the general areas that are being affected is the Strait of Hormuz and the shipping traffic which has been completely disrupted, leading to a massive ripple effect across the globe. Today in this story, I would like to speak a little bit more in terms of how that shipping traffic is being impacted and what could it lead to in the short to medium term, and specifically how will it affect Pakistan, and also if there are any hidden opportunities if this status quo breaks and remains broken in so many ways in the months to come. And to discuss this, I am joined by a guest who knows this topic inside out. Joining me is Mr. Matthew Wright. He is the principal freight analyst at Kepler, which is of course a leading data and analytics company, and it provides real-time intelligence on global commodity flows. Mr. Wright specializes in oil tanker markets and maritime freight analysis, and of course he's an expert commentator on shipping disruptions. He's been talking about the Strait of Hormuz and the conflict there in a number of international channels. So we are very honored that Mr. Wright joins us today. Mr. Wright, welcome to our show. So today, of course, as I was mentioning, there is an element of uncertainty about the talks, but there is nothing uncertain about the situation in the Straits of Hormuz. What is the state of ships and tankers right now? What is happening? Where are they parked? What's going on there?
Yeah, great question. So as it is right now, there's very little traffic going in or out. We are seeing the occasional vessel, but for the last, today and on Sunday, we've seen maybe 2 vessels either entering or exiting. But this is, there's been a lot of noise and a lot of mixed messages. On Friday afternoon, we had that tweet from the Iranian foreign minister that said, the Strait of Hormuz is open. Immediately, dozens of vessels that have been trapped in the Mideast Gulf for weeks and weeks rushed towards the Strait of Hormuz. And they got towards the Strait of Hormuz, and then they were radioed by the Iranian army, the IRGC, the Navy, and told to turn around. So you have the politicians saying it's open, and then there you have the Navy, the Army saying actually it's not. So a lot of those vessels turned around. Now, as it was over Saturday morning, from around midnight Saturday through to early Saturday morning, we did see a large number of vessels exit. We saw 24 vessels leave, moving in and out of the Mideast Gulf. That's the most we've seen since the war began. But then a tanker, the Sanmar Herald, which was an Indian tanker with an Iraqi cargo on board, was shot at by an Iranian gunboat, and then all traffic has ceased again. And this is a continuation of the situation that we've basically seen for the last couple of months. There's some hope, some building confidence that maybe this time the market is opening up, and then our hopes are dashed, and transits drop back down. So fundamentally, transits are what we want to be watching. That is what matters to the market. And at the moment, they're still very, very low.
And this incident which happened last night, where an Iranian tanker was intercepted by American naval forces, they boarded it. Last report suggests they have it in their control. What kind of an impact has that had on the market?
Yeah, so this is the first confirmation that the US really are enforcing the blockade. So we've got sort of two situations. You've got the Iranians controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and then you've got the US controlling the Gulf of Oman. So the entrance there, if you can imagine a line being drawn from the Omani coast through to the eastern side of Iran. And they arrested this vessel. It was a container vessel looking to enter, moving into the Gulf of Oman towards the Strait of Hormuz. And as you said, they've as far as we've been aware, they took control of the vessel. So this is confirmation that that there is a blockade, and they are enforcing this. And so far, the blockade from the US point of view has been broadly successful. We haven't seen any confirmation of Iranian crude, for example, leaving the region. And that is significant. Iran has been the only country to continuously maintain exports throughout the war. But up until now, that looks like that is coming to a halt for the time being, at least.
Do we have any idea of how many tankers are stranded in the Strait of Hormuz? How many are in port? Are there any which left the port but now can't go back and are in open waters? Do we have any information about all of this data?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Dorothy, when it comes to there's close to 1,000 vessels trapped in the Mideast Gulf. Hundreds of tankers and dry bulk vessels. For the tankers' point of view, the vast majority of them are loaded. A lot of them that got stuck in the region subsequently were then booked to load cargoes. And this was just to help facilitate port facilities and actual limitations in terms of storage at a lot of the ports. So there is a large, almost all of the largest tank vessels are actually in the Mideast Gulf are actually loaded, and they're waiting. They're sitting there with millions and millions, hundreds of millions of barrels of crude, refined products waiting to be loaded. Majority of them are not at ports. They're at anchorages, sort of in and around, across the Mideast Gulf. A lot of them are stationed off the UAE, obviously towards the exit, towards the entrance to the strait, in anticipation of some reopening and given the chance to exit. Obviously, these vessels have been stuck in a war zone for 8 weeks, and so understandably, they're very eager to leave.
And how is that impacting alternate routes, for example, the Red Sea route or other avenues? Are we seeing a lot of traffic being diverted there, and is that helping in any way, or is the demand outstripping supply so much that the impact could be negligible?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we've definitely seen a huge amount of changes in terms of trade flows, and from a vessel's point of view, massive changes. The Mideast Gulf accounts for over 50% of VLCC. These are the very large crude carriers, the largest tankers that carry vessels that cargo over long distance. Without the Mideast Gulf, there really isn't much opportunity elsewhere. So we are seeing a big shift. The Red Sea has been a key one. The Saudi Arabia exports between 4.5 million barrels a day from Yanbu in the Red Sea, and that has been ramped up and is providing an outlet. We're also seeing a lot more inquiry from the US, West Africa, Latin America. A lot more of that crude is going east. But there's just simply not enough. The world doesn't balance without the Mideast Gulf. So we are at a point now where, countries, particularly in Asia, are drawing down on their inventories. But there is a limitation to how much longer they can do that for.
How soon would the aviation airline industry be impacted? Because we're constantly hearing about the shortage of jet fuel, and that, especially in Europe, the reservoirs are depleting very quickly. So, if this continues for maybe a couple of weeks or more, how serious would the situation be for aviation industry?
Yeah, it's incredibly serious. I would say, for Europe, the jet fuel really is the major pinch point, and diesel, of course. I think estimates range between 40 to 50 days in terms of cover. They are able to source jet fuel from alternative locations. Europe is bringing now in jet fuel from West Africa, but the Mideast Gulf is such a huge provider of European jet fuel. It is driving prices higher and making availability very, very tight. But absolutely, unless we see some change in the situation, we're going to see ever higher jet fuel prices, and potentially come later in the summer, some flight cancellations.
So that situation, of course, is getting very, very serious. Now, Mr. Wright, I want to turn to the long-term or mid-term impacts of this conflict, specifically on shipping, on insurance, on freight. What do you foresee in the short to medium term that could happen?
Yeah. So on the from a tanker's point of view, it's incredibly detrimental to demand. There just simply isn't enough cargo to go around. So we're expecting, if this were to persist, I think, just to be clear, it could reduce tanker demand by around 15 to 20% annually. But compared to the impact that we would see on economies, particularly in Southeast Asia and Africa, this far more significant. Fundamentally, just the loss of refined products, LPG, gasoline, diesel. We're going to see real substantial impacts in terms of economic growth across Asia and Africa.
And now, one of the outcomes is that ports like Karachi and Port Qasim, two important ports in Pakistan, are receiving a lot of traffic. I was looking at some data, Mr. Wright, and it says that in the last 1 month, the amount of traffic that we've had there is more than what we normally have in a year. So obviously, this major disruption is causing traffic in places like Pakistan and to increase, which obviously is good for Pakistan. Which it's not. I feel bad saying that, because one shouldn't be taking advantage of a conflict, but that's the way economies work. That's the way shipping and traffic works. So do you see that in the long term, the way that shipping was being done through the Straits of Hormuz will now fundamentally change, and there'll be no going back to the way things were, and that there are opportunities for places like Pakistan, which are very strategically placed in this region and can, of course, do much more with their ports?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you explained it exactly right there. Pakistan is, those ports are very, very well placed when it comes to the current situation. They're sufficiently outside of the area of the conflict, which provides vessels with, a sort of safe haven, but while still being within the proximity of the Middle East. It's obviously, being able to anticipate what's going to happen in the Mideast Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz is incredibly difficult, but it does feel like this could be a fundamental change in the way that traffic operates there. I think we do all hope that the situation will be resolved, and for the global economy, that we're able to return to a normal transit. I think, unfortunately, if we sort of remain in the status quo, which is essentially Iranian permitted and Iranian controlled transit, we will never get back to historic levels, like pre-war levels of transits that are required to export the products and the crude and the dry bulk, the fertilizers that the global economy needs. So, we're yeah.
So finally, is there any alternative to the Straits of Hormuz? And of course, what I mean is that the dependency on this area for shipping, for energy requirements, in the short term, we all know, the alternatives do not provide the same kind of traffic that the Strait of Hormuz can produce. But looking ahead, do you think this is a time where countries will think that they need an alternative, and are there any alternatives that can be developed over the coming years?
Certainly over the coming years, but you're absolutely right. In the short term, unfortunately not. And I think the real concern is the time required to for the economy to adjust to a loss in at least some substantial percentage of Middle East exports would cause significant damage to global growth. So, my view is we will get to higher levels. I do think we do need to anticipate that the market seems to be anticipating that at any moment the strait could open. But I think we should be aware that there's a huge amount of distrust on both sides for both the Americans and the Iranians. And from a shipper's point of view, that doesn't embolden much confidence. So even if there was an announcement today that a deal had been struck between the two sides, I think we're looking at least 1 to 2 months. We'll see a lot of vessels exit the Mideast Gulf rapidly. But to get back to real levels of shipper confidence where vessels want to re-enter the Mideast Gulf, I think it's going to take a number of months. The insurance industry is going to want to see a long period without attacks. And then, of course, there's the time to repair all of the damaged infrastructure in the Mideast Gulf, which is going to take 6 to 12 months.
So we are looking at enhanced costs for sure.
Absolutely.
Mr. Matthew Wright, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your analysis with us. Of course, as I was saying, every crisis has an opportunity, and given the kind of traffic that we are attracting at our ports, clearly there is a opportunity and a potential. Much can be done. We hope that it will be done. And now, before we close, a little bit about how it feels to be a Pakistani nowadays. Every once in a while, a country has a moment when it sees itself reflected differently. Not in the way outsiders have often described it, but through a much larger and more dignified lens. And I think that is what many Pakistanis are feeling right now. There is this warmth, this emotional lift, this sense that something important is happening, and that for once the world is looking at Pakistan not as a problem to be managed, but as a country helping manage a problem bigger than itself. That feels good. It feels deeply good. What feels different is that in one of the most dangerous confrontations in the world right now, the place both sides keep circling back to is Islamabad. All roads, at least diplomatically, seem to lead to Islamabad. There were the 21 hours of direct talks here. There was the ceasefire framework Pakistan helped shape. There has been shuttle diplomacy, the Prime Minister moving through key capitals, the Field Marshal in Tehran continuing efforts to prevent the process from collapsing even when Iran has signaled mistrust and hesitation to return. That is not optics. That is geopolitical relevance. And perhaps that is why this moment has touched a nerve inside Pakistan. People are responding not only to what the leadership is doing, but to what it reveals about the country itself. There is a quiet satisfaction in seeing strengths you always believed existed suddenly become visible to others. Strategic maturity, political expertise, the ability to talk across divides, the instinct to mediate rather than inflame. None of these qualities appeared only last week. They were always there. History has simply given Pakistan a chance to showcase them. And showcase we have. And perhaps that is why even the memes, the jokes, the viral celebration of Pakistani identity, they all have resonance. People laugh, but beneath the laughter, there is a thought. Maybe the joke contains the truth. Maybe public instinct has spotted a shift. And I think it has. This is not mediation in some abstract dispute. This is mediation in a war that has affected oil markets, maritime security, regional stability, and the trajectory of great power politics. When a country of 250 million nuclear arms strategically situated at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Gulf, when that country steps into that kind of a moment and begins helping hold open diplomatic space, that is not punching above your weight. That is using your weight. And there is a difference. Part of what Pakistanis are feeling is relief too. Relief that the story of Pakistan need not always be told as a cautionary tale. Relief that the world can also see what works here. Relief that the country can be associated in a moment of crisis, not with exporting instability, but with trying to contain it. And that matters psychologically to a nation. It matters politically too. This moment should not make us complacent. It should make us ambitious. If Pakistan does things right, if institutions work, if leadership is serious, if national strengths are aligned intelligently, then Pakistan can play a major role in the world. Not episodically, but consistently. That is the real meaning of this moment. It is not self-congratulations, it is possibility. There are moments in the life of a nation when something shifts internally. Not because borders move, not because economies suddenly transform, but because people begin to see themselves differently. And I think that is happening now. Because when all roads seem to lead to Pakistan, when world powers look to Pakistan as a place where difficult diplomacy might still be possible, when your capital becomes a venue for peace rather than spectator conflict, that does something to national self-belief. It reminds people of who they are, and perhaps more importantly, of who they can be. That is why this moment is bigger than negotiations. It is bigger than one ceasefire. It is bigger than one successful round of talks. This is about confidence, national confidence. And nations that recover confidence often recover much more than confidence. They recover direction, they recover ambition, they recover purpose. And that is why I think so many Pakistanis feel warmth in this moment. Because for once, the story the world is telling about Pakistan and the story Pakistanis want to tell about themselves are beginning to meet. And that is rare and precious and powerful. A country does not become great only by winning wars. Sometimes a country shows greatness by preventing one. Sometimes strength lies not in confrontation, but in keeping a door open when others are trying to shut it. Sometimes history remembers not the loudest actor in the room, but the one that made the room possible. And if Pakistan is helping make that room possible today, then every Pakistani has reason to feel pride. Real pride, earned pride. Pakistan did not wait for history to call its name. It stepped forward when history needed it. When a nation does that, it does not just raise its standing in the world, it raises something in its own people. Their confidence, their hope, their belief that those things matter. Because countries rise first in the imagination of their people before they rise anywhere else. And maybe, just maybe, that rise is what we are beginning to feel. Which is why tonight, it does feel good to be a Pakistani. It feels good because there is pride. It feels good because there is possibility. It feels good because for a rare and meaningful moment, Pakistan is not standing at the margins of history. Pakistan is helping shaping.